Our focus today is going to be to look at the negative consequences of over-reliance on an individual leader. Specifically, we'll take a look at the consequences of relying on a single leader, independence versus interdependence in leadership roles, management styles, and disagreement and debate among leaders. So let's take a look at what happens when we spend too much time relying on a specific individual. Now, we touched on the fact that rapid upward movement of personnel through the hierarchy can actually hurt the company's ability to develop effective leadership. And what happens is we end up with more of a structured or authoritarian leadership style, also called mechanistic. This creates dominant leaders. Dominant leaders can create dysfunction. They can displace group initiative. They can create slow decision making. In other words, when a leader becomes too dominant, the employees become afraid to share ideas, to speak up. When a company is working to change those behaviors to a more centralized environment, dominant leaders are probably going to create problems because they're going to resist that change. We need to understand how our leaders function when we are focusing on a behavioral change and a new strategy for the company. So what happens is we become reliant on these dominant leaders, whether they're line managers or department managers or general managers. And too much dependency on that single leader is going to displace us as a group. We're going to, it's called, and this is not so much a change management theory, but it's a psychological theory. It's called an external locus of control. It means that we are looking at someone else as being in control of our future. This is what a dominant leader wants to do. They want to be in control. Is it a bad thing? It depends upon the situation. Is it a bad thing for a company that's wanting to decentralize and become more open and more organic and be able to strategically renew? You probably got a problem there. So what happens is everybody becomes too reliant on this dominant leader, and as a result, the decision-making process becomes slower. The communication process becomes longer. It becomes more of a taller hierarchy. It kind of goes completely opposite of the delayering and the decentralization. So dominant leaders, especially ones that really exercise that leadership on the part through coercion and manipulation, are probably not going to fit in with a company that's trying to focus more on decentralization. And then what we have to consider is the removal and the replacement if we are unable to retrain or redevelop that particular leader. So leadership roles are either independent or interdependent. Independence means it's not dependent. It's free. It's not subject to control by others. It's not relying on other people. You're not subordinate. You're not biased. You're not subject to bias or influence. You're self-directing. You're easy. You're bold. You're unconstrained. You're free from external control and constraint. Interdependent is mutually dependent. What do I mean by that? It means that we depend on each other. We require collaboration. We require interaction, dialogue. We talked about how important dialogue was. We're learning from each other. We're experiencing others' levels of knowledge. We go through experiential concepts, thinking. So top executives, a lot of times they're going to conceive their roles in an independent rather than an interdependent way. So if you look at the independents, we could probably equate more of a dominant leader to an independent leadership role. Whereas if we look at interdependence, we could look at more of a democratic kind of leader that is willing to delegate and willing to interact to the interdependent role. And when an organization has grown through like acquisition and mergers, a lot of times top executives see their roles as being very autonomous. They resent others. They don't want others to impose on what they feel is their independent authority. So we also, when we look at leadership roles like that, we look at management style. When we have a centralized leadership, it means that there's going to be a tight hold over the reins of decision making. It means that we're going to micromanage. We're going to look over your shoulder. We're constantly going to be making sure that you're doing things the way we want you to do. Are there scenarios where this is okay? You bet. Every time you walk into a Taco Bell or a McDonald's, you're seeing a centralized leadership. You're seeing a tighter rein and more of an authoritarian environment because the industry requires it. You've got people that are having to work in certain events, certain time periods, and manufacturing is one of those. And fast food is really just a form of manufacturing. And you need to have more of a centralized leadership when you're dealing in an industry like that. Now, what about decentralized leadership? Where does that fit? Well, it fits in a lot of places. In just about any environment where you're not dealing with 100% regulation or requirements, legal requirements because of safety or anything along that line, then a decentralized leadership is probably going to work a little bit easier. So once again, remember when we talked about structure, we talked about the fact that it is the environment, and both the internal and the external environment and the industry and the products and everything that are going to determine the structure. Same idea with management. We look at the industry and we look at the environment. There are many, many, many successful businesses that are centralized. And there are just as many successful businesses that are decentralized. It's real easy to get caught up in the either or, and you really don't want to do that because you need to understand that there is a place for all of these different types of management. Some of the disagreement and debate between leaders today, again, it depends upon the type of leader. You could go back to McGregor's Theory X, Theory Y. You know, Theory X is all people, are lazy and don't want to lead and don't want to be a part of the organization. Theory Y is all about people want to be a part of the organization. There's always going to be disagreement and there's always going to be debate between leaders. Some leaders think consensus is good, argument is bad. Is it? We've talked several times about how functional some conflict can be. So if there is actually some conflict that is functional, then is consensus good and argument bad? Something to think about. Diversity of opinions. Do we want to allow people to speak up and be innovative and be creative? It depends upon the environment. And a decentralized organization or an organization that's embracing like a matrix structure, you betcha. But if you're in more of a structured or authoritarian environment, probably not. Debate, conflict, again, it depends upon the environment. There's no one right answer or wrong answer. It's all a matter of understanding that it is the environment that's going to dictate how we structure, how we lead, how we manage.